So this video was inspired by Sam. Sam, who's also a patron of the podcast. Shout out to Sam and all my patrons. Sam asked a question about how she could support her nieces, particularly her 4-year-old niece, from a liberatory space, how she could use a self-directed model for supporting her niece who recently, both nieces recently lost their father, who is Sam's or was Sam's brother-in-law. Okay. So Sam and her husband are now wanting to play a bigger role in supporting their niece's mother in, just raising her daughters. And Sam has been exposed to this unschooled approach, this approach of really raising free people, decolonizing learning, and wants to explore ways to support that, still respecting the dynamic between the mother and her daughters, and just figuring out that space. So this video is all about that, and I got some support from a good friend of mine, fellow longtime unschooler, way longer than we've been unschooling, Zakia Ismail out of Johannesburg, South Africa, and I can't wait to share with y'all what Zakia said, but that's the context. And I really appreciate that Sam and her husband are willing to step up and be part of that village that it takes to raise free people. So let's get into the how of that, some ideas on how that can happen in their lives. That a lot of it is about observation, right? Like putting yourself in a position to, the same way that you observed her climbing up on the arms of the furniture and just being completely disconnected from any idea of danger. And so you enrolled her in tumbling and she loved it. Doing more of that. When we talk about getting someone ready for kindergarten, it starts to be less about now the learner and more about like fitting them into the role of student. And we actually don't need to turn a learner into a student. A learner will study many things as their interests develop and as they start to focus on particular levels of interest. Something goes from a general interest like, oh, I like flowers, to, oh, I drew this flower that I picked, and now I'm spending a lot of time drawing flowers. So you observe from that child is into flowers. So you can, as a facilitator, nurture that interest in flowers and also connect it to other things that are going on around flowers. Like, flowers are part of an ecosystem. Bees affect flowers. Wind affects what flowers, seeds go into different places. You can introduce them to that sort of variety. Then you're looking at books that have different topics related to these things, and some, like a barrier to reading. A child who might be into drawing but not into reading may love a book about flowers because flowers was the first thing that they drew. A flower was the first thing they drew. So if you're observing instead of assuming what they should or shouldn't know, then you'll see that. And then you'll be able to nurture learning that's already happening and help branch it out into other things, recognizing the instances where you are putting your idea of what they should learn before what you're actually observing. And then over time, learning how to let go of what you think should be happening and nurture what you observe happening. So that's something that you can do as a parent. That's something you can do as an auntie or an uncle, a grandparent, as a teacher, especially in a kindergarten setting, or someone who's been charged with preparing a child for kindergarten. That's another topic. But yeah, Sam, I hope that's helpful because that's one of the things that comes up right away for me. So I'm going to read Zakia's response, and I really consider this like a book. I feel like there's an entire book that could be built out around this response, and I'm so excited to share it here. So Zakia says, first up, I want to say it's wonderful that they're stepping up. After all, it does take a village, and a village that is in sync and committed to living in partnership with a young person is a real gift and it's what the world needs more of. Partnership is the key word here for me. So good allies and a useful supportive role would be first and foremost to partner with the mom and not power over her, right? We get what she's saying there, right? Let's make sure that we're not like wondering whether the mom is doing the best thing or not, and then, trying to overstep that boundary, which is not at all what I get from you, Sam, but just for everyone else who's considering, that's the first thing. Checking to see whether the things that you're considering, the ideas that you have, checking in with the mom so that she feels included in the process, because that's important. Then Zakiya goes on to say, this being a new parenting paradigm from how most of us were raised warrants a more conscious and intentional learning and self-reflection in how we relate to young people. And it would be great for the three to partner in learning and growing together. And they're two nieces, by the way. Sam and her husband have two nieces. But I was talking to Zakiya about the younger one in particular, the 4-year-old, because she's at home throughout the day with her mom. The older one, 10, is entering the 5th grade. So it would be great for the three to partner in learning and growing together, the three being Sam and her husband and the mom, by sharing resources with each other and having an open line of communication. How they relate to each other, especially when faced with obstacles, are fundamental, as this will be the young child's experience and model of relating and negotiating in partnership. One I thought that was really poignant too, because we hear a lot, lead by example. And of course, we feel the pressure, certainly as parents, maybe also as educators, this pressure to be how we want the children around us to be, and of course we fall short of that because we're human beings. And it can be hard to try to sort of mimic this thing that you don't even feel true. You don't even feel that you actually are, which is a person who has it all together all the time and all this shit, right? But what you can do, an easier way to look at modeling behavior, is in your relationship with other people. So in this instance, the example that Zakiya is giving is looking at when there's an obstacle, instead of like hiding it from the child and trying to present this all together way, we have it all together way and we'll figure it out. Say, this is the challenge that we're having. Include her, essentially, or him. Include the child in the process, not from a space of like talking about, I don't like that your uncle did this, or not from that space, but more so like, we're trying to come up with a way that matches what we think you want and what is ideal for us, or, what's necessary for us, whether that's about scheduling, or whether it's about whether they're okay with her taking a certain type of class or not. Including a child in that way without the burden of the details is a tricky thing, right? Because we're not saying get all in your feelings and vent to a child, but we're saying include them in the decision-making process as much as you can, because you are there to support them. And this is a great way to model that behavior in your relationship with other adults, supporting the child. So Zakiya goes on to say this relationship needs to be worked out as a priority because this young child is not a silent partner in the relationship, right? It's actually a foursome. It's the 3 adults involved and each niece. That's the group of 4. Of course, how much input the allies make into the lives of these girls has to ultimately be determined by each child herself and with her consent. And this is, again, why we need this Raising Free People work. This is the type of language that we need to be more comfortable hearing. I'm going to read that last sentence again. Of course, how much input the allies make into the lives of these girls has to ultimately be determined by each child herself and with her consent. So we got to get used to the notion of consent coming from children, because as adults, we never had that model growing up, and we're groomed to believe that we don't need young people's consent. We need actually to convince them to go with what we think is best. And if you check it, I was going to say if you take a stop, that's the patois term, if you take a stop, if you take a look at it, right? If you take a stop and look at your own story, sure, there may be times that an adult saved you from yourself, saved you from a stupid mistake. But I also think that there are many times where you needed to have that autonomy. You needed to have the practice. You knew what was best for you, but you couldn't act on that without consequence because an adult thought something to the contrary, right? So in Raising Free People work, we're trying to minimize those experiences by seeing the child as a part of the process, not a silent partner, not a beneficiary of some process that we create for them, So, so Zakia says, usually children are most welcoming to people that love and accept them unconditionally, but it is still essential to get her consent on the macro and micro aspects of the relationship. Something that I can see coming up is the child potentially opting to develop a friendlier type of relationship with either the aunt or uncle. I think sometimes it's easier for a child to have a non-parent as parent gets bogged down in the operation of day-to-day living, or we get too easily caught up in our fears. And this is something to be aware of and welcomed rather than becoming an issue, right? So this is, this is something also for the mom to consider, that if your daughter develops a sense of fondness or closeness to an aunt or uncle, try to check in with your feelings if you feel threatened in some way or you feel like you're being encroached upon, because that's about you. Is it best for the child? Is there an issue for the child? If not, work on your feelings instead of trying to, maneuver in and out of the relationship. Tough shit. I know it's tough shit to actually do, because we're complicated, but it's certainly worth exploring and considering, and it's an option. Yeah. So Sam, I hope that's helpful. And then I hope to hear some feedback from you, Sam, or from any of you who felt like this was helpful for you too. Peace and love. Thanks for watching Unschooling Liberation Space, the YouTube location, and I will talk to you in November.